G'day. I have a couple of dividing heads, and this is my small one. This is my Ellis. It's a US brand. It's quite a reasonable dividing head. It's of the semi-universal type, and as with a lot of things, I bought this incomplete, and so gradually I'm getting around to fixing it. So one of the things I have to do soon is make a couple more dividing plates. I've already made up the crank and the handle, and today I'm going to show you making up this little bolt latch arrangement. I originally started off doing this thinking that it's not all that complicated, there's nothing much to see here, but then I decided that, well, perhaps there was, so apologies if the video is a little bit disjointed. Basically there are three parts. There's a little handle here which has got a rounded back to it. There's a, for want of a better term, a bolt, and then there's the bracket the bolt sits in. The bracket I've made up a few weeks back. The bolt shaft is pretty straightforward, but most of the video talks about shaping this handle and putting that slot in there. I'm starting by making the end of the handle. That gives me maximum support out of the chuck. I'll be using the file to gently round that over, and I guess the key thing to watch here for a safety point of view is that I'm using a file what you'd call left-handed, so that I haven't got an arm or a sleeve dangling over the chuck where it could be caught and I could be pulled into the lathe. The focus is on this isn't all that good, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, you can see what I've done here. I've filed off that step, and it was just slow, easy strokes. Blended that in a little bit. I've also got the polishing felt out and given that a bit of a polish up. Haven't worried too much about this bit because I've still got to trim that down. I've moved the part out of the chuck a little bit. I've cleaned up that area, given that a bit more of a polish. I'm now going to neck down that blue bit to the minor diameter of the thread that I want to put on there, and the reason for that will be seen shortly. I've now necked this down to the minor diameter of the thread that I'm going to put on there, which will be 1/8 Whitworth. The reason for that is that, as some of you may have realised, there's no easy way to hold this part, and so putting it into a vise and then running a die over the top is going to be very difficult, especially to get it lined up square. So what you do is put a minor diameter on there and use that as a guide for your die, and then you can run the die onto the part you want threaded. After all that's done, you just come along and you can cut off that lead-in part, and you'll have a threaded part just the way you wanted it. Some of you may be wondering why I rounded the end off with a file, and it's basically, it was so small that that was the more sensible way to do it for me. You can use a rounding tool. This is one here set up, and that would work as well. The problem with the rounding tool is that it applies force that way to deflect the material, so for small material it's not ideal. If you just came along and did that and plunged straight in, you'd likely run into trouble. You get chatter and all that sort of thing. So there is a technique that seems to work better than others, and I'll just show you that now. So you probably get the idea there. If you alternate coming in the different directions, because you're only picking up a little bit of the material at the same time, you've got less force on the tool, less likelihood for chatter and all the rest of it. This tool is a little bit big for this, a little bit small for this piece of material, so it's probably not going to give me terribly much more of a result than I've got there, so I'll leave it at that. I originally was doing this with the little handle I'd made up, but then I realised after watching the clips I'd made that an M3 thread, you really can't see it. So this is a demonstration piece. Another way to hold these things without bruising the part is using a bit of card, and these are actually some old bits of business card. I keep working for companies who give me business cards and then don't give me the opportunity to use them. So when I leave, I use the cards for a far better purpose. So here's an M16 die. I've taken that down to the core diameter of the thread, and so you can see, or you may be able to see, I'll see if I can get this to work, looking down in there, that sits just nicely on the minor diameter. So that will start quite happily like that. I'm just picking up a minuscule amount of material. Right. And if I take that off, you can see there's just a very slight scratch pass for the die, but that's enough that'll get that centered, directionally, correct, and all that sort of thing, so that when it comes down to cutting the main bit of thread, your die is lined up. So here we go. Now, and that's spinning on me, unfortunately. There we go. There we go. So there's an M16 thread, which, because of the pilot diameter, is pretty much on its way through to being good. If I just tried to tap that normally, I would have had to line it all up and all that sort of stuff. Here's my handle. It's been threaded. I've run a nut down there, so when I cut it off there at about the 5mm mark, I can run the nut across and smooth out the thread if it's been distorted a little bit by the cutting. This is the body of the latch. I've mounted this on a scrap piece of steel, and I've put a rod in there so that I can centre this up in the 4-jaw chuck, and then I'll be mounting it in the mill on the 4th axis and doing a bit of spiral milling to put the groove in there, which I'll show you shortly. Here I am making up the latch for the bolt. I've just done a first pass, and just to check clearances and things, and then I can take this out now. I've used that to centre. For those people who wonder why it costs so much to get something machined, I've spent probably the best part of 2 hours, I'd say, setting up the dividing head just to be able to mill a spiral slot. So that's the reason why it can cost so much to get things machined. The setup can be incredible. When you think about the cost of this, or the size of this part, you think, is it really worth it? Altogether, these are the three parts. So I've got my little handle, which I started off making, threaded in with an 1/8 Whitworth thread into just a piece of stainless bar in this case, and I've got my latch housing. Now, some people may ask, well, why couldn't you just file this? And the answer is that if I filed it, the sides of this slot would be at an angle, and at all times that needs to be at right angles to the knob so that it'll travel properly. And in use, this is what it's doing. It's rotating around there like so, and these Ellis deciding heads are sort of ambidextrous. You can use them on the left or the right hand of the machine, and I'm actually in the process of swapping over. So that will go here. I'll drill and tap a couple of holes into the cast iron body, and then once that's in place, I can then come through and spot through some holes on this indexing disc around here, and I'll be able to have my 24 quick indexing positions. So that's a wrap. I hope that that's been interesting and informative for people, and going to